You okay?
Yeah, what do you mean? Yeah.
You gonna be okay without me here?
But you don't think I could survive here without you?
Okay, just don't be a okay? Like, be nice to Mom, okay? Don't give her a hard time. She deserves a break.
I always give her a break. When am I gonna get my break? Like,
What are you talking about? All anyone ever does is worry about you. I was ignored my entire childhood because of you.
oh yeah, I forgot that my childhood was so dandy.
Okay, you don't get to act crazy your whole life just because Dad died, okay? At least you got to know him.
Well, you're lucky you didn't get to know him, okay? Because that's why you're almost normal. If you got to know him, you would have known that he was like the coolest guy ever, and that would have ruined the rest of your life.
Okay, like, but what are you gonna do? Are you gonna get a job or are you gonna leave the house?
I don't know. I'm gonna open that tattoo restaurant.
No, like, for real.
I am being real. It's never been done before. I looked it up. I Googled it. It's never been done, not even as a joke.
And that's a clip from The King of Staten Island. It's the new movie from Judd Apatow, who joins us from. Actually, I should have checked. I don't know where you are. Where are you, Judd?
I am at home in Santa Monica, California.
Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And there's lots to talk about. But does it feel a bit odd promoting a film with the riots going on and the fight against COVID? I mean, how are you approaching promoting your film? What, does it feel strange to you?
What is interesting about it is our film is, about first responders.
Yes, it is.
And it's also about sudden trauma and grief and how these types of events affect a family. So, what we've made oddly relates to so much of what we're all experiencing. So it is obviously very strange and it's very scary. It's a tenuous time, but we're proud of the movie. We think that it will have a positive effect, and we're just trying to handle it all as respectfully as we can.
Yeah. Just introduce us then to the story to Pete Davidson and how and tell us the story of the King of Staten Island, and then we can take it from there.
Well, the story is fictional, but it's inspired by Pete's real life. When he was 7 years old, his father was a firefighter who lost his life on 9/11, and that obviously was a very traumatic part of his life that has reverberated for a long time. We sat down with his writing partner, Dave Cyrus, and we tried to come up with a way to tell a fictional story that would be emotionally truthful to all that Pete has been through. So in the film, it's about a young man, Scott, who lives with his mom and his sister. And his sister's dealt with trauma by getting straight A's and getting into a good college. He's dealt with it by being stoned and just having no real vision for himself. And when the movie starts, his sister's leaving for college, and now he's going to be stuck alone in the house with his mom. And when his mom decides to start dating again, she starts dating a firefighter. And suddenly he has to confront all of the issues that have held him back in his life. So it's a comedy for sure, but it's handled very seriously and dramatically. And I feel like Pete Davidson has done something that's very hard to do, which is he made himself very vulnerable to tell a story that is raw and real for so many people, and hopefully it's entertaining as well.
Yeah. Which and when people know that story, Judd, the scene in the movie where Pete goes to a ball game with the guy who's just started to date his mother, and he meets a fire crew that are at the game as well, and they have this conversation, this argument where he's giving them a hard time and saying, firemen shouldn't have kids. I mean, it's such a poignant scene, and then knowing what you've just told us about Pete Davidson's dad for real in 9/11, that must have made it that particular scene, and many other scenes, but that scene in particular, really powerful.
It was, and when we shot it, it was pretty intense because we did an enormous amount of improvisation, and Pete's dad's best friend, who he worked with, was an actor in the movie and one of our consultants, and half of the firefighters in the movie are current firefighters.
Wow.
We wanted that authenticity. And Pete really opened himself up and does this epic rant about how if you want to have kids, you shouldn't be a firefighter, you should be a librarian or a dentist, and he really yells at all of them. And it's darkly funny, but it's what the movie is about, because it's partially about a young man trying to reconcile the idea that his dad was the kind of person who was willing to give his life to save other people. And as a kid, it's hard to understand because you think, well, why wouldn't he be obsessed with staying around for me? And part of the story is him coming to understand why his dad, and a lot of people are willing to make that sacrifice and why that sacrifice is important. You know, we're seeing it every day with COVID, not just nurses and doctors, but anybody who's dealing with the public, delivery people, people in grocery stores. There's an enormous amount of brave people who are keeping, you know, the world running, and they put themselves at great risk. And our movie, you know, is a way of paying tribute to those people.
Yes. And even as I think this is right in saying, I'm right in saying Steve Buscemi, who is one of the firefighters who we meet at the game, and then afterwards when they go back to the fire station, that he was a firefighter himself, wasn't he?
Yes, he was a firefighter for about 4 or 5 years before his acting career took off. After 9/11, he was there. He joined in with all the firefighters for the cleanup. He's very involved with firefighting charities. He's such a sweet, big-hearted person, and he plays Papa, one of the elders at the fire station. And in a lot of ways, he's the voice of, you know, this love for somebody like Pete, who suffered as a result of the loss of his dad.
And Steve Buscemi is one of those actors who, whenever he's on screen, you cannot take your eyes off him.
Yeah, and it's magic because when you work with him, he's so natural. You barely notice what he's doing. There's no effort that you can see. And then you get the dailies back and you watch them, and it's just like he's captured real life. And he's so funny and charming and loving. And it's all there. But on the day when you're shooting, you almost can't tell that he's doing it.
Could you, I mean, this might sound like a pretty basic question. It's certainly a question you might get asked from the UK and not from anywhere in the US. Could you introduce us to Staten Island? I mean, I know it's known as the Forgotten Borough and so on, but it's not necessarily a place people will go on their holidays. Just tell us the significance. And you shot most of it in Staten Island. So could you introduce us to this place?
Well, Staten Island is, you know, right next to Manhattan. And it's a place where a lot of blue-collar people live. It's interesting because it's so close to Manhattan, but there's nothing on the island that would make anyone visit there. There's no amusement park. There's no great theater. There's no arts community. It's just where, you know, people live. So you wouldn't ever go there if you didn't have a relative or a friend there. As a result, it's its own bubble. And the people who live there, if they don't commute to Manhattan, they tend to not leave very often. I mean, Pete told me when he was a kid, you know, he might go years between visiting Manhattan, which is 15 minutes away on a ferry. So it's a very, you know, odd, wonderful place. I had a great time being there. I thought everyone was super nice. But Pete likes to describe it as an odd place.
We often associate, well, I often associate you with being, apart from a funny guy and a producer, yourself and a stand-up, but you're a career maker. You know, people like Seth Rogen and Jonah Hill and Melissa McCarthy often associated with you. You were involved with them very, very early on. Was it clear to you that for a long time that Pete Davidson has been someone you wanted to make a movie with, or how did that come about?
When I first saw him, he was 20 years old and ridiculously funny. He's very big-hearted and he's so likable, but he definitely is a little haunted. You sense that he's been through a lot, and like, you know, like a rock star, you root for him. You know he's working through something, which makes him fascinating. And I definitely felt immediately that he had that brash charisma that Adam Sandler had when I met Adam when I was a kid. And he's just a great guy. And as I've gotten to know him, he's very, very intelligent and a daring artist. I keep trying to explain to him, because he doesn't quite get it, that it took most of us about 10 movies which were super goofy before any of us had the courage to make a movie like The King of Staten Island. You know, we all start with silly movies. My first movie was about a summer camp for overweight kids. I didn't attempt to do something this personal and deep and complex for a long, long time. You might even say till now. So, you know, underneath what seems like, you know, a funny, silly guy, you know, is definitely a searching artist.
You've said in the past that you approach every film when it comes out, you're scared it's going to be a disaster. Have you stopped thinking that now? Are you slightly more confident?
I think the great thing about making movies is no matter how good you think your last one was, it doesn't apply at all to the new one. You always are terrified that the new one will be terrible. And that's what makes you work hard, because you can't get complacent. It's so easy for these things to come out wrong, because it's a miracle of chemistry and storytelling and things going right on certain days. Sometimes you have a scene and you think something really special has to happen between these two people in order for it to work. And you pray that it happens. And sometimes in some movies, it just doesn't happen. But most movies we see are bad because whatever that undefinable thing that you need just doesn't surface.
When we spoke last, it was back in 2013 for This Is 40. And at the end of the interview, I would have said, as far as I'm aware, the movie is out on Friday and people could go and see it at their local cinema. Now, the line I have here is The King of Staten Island is available to rent from home on June the 12th. Does that make it, how does that feel for you as the person who's put your life into this movie? Is that exciting? Is that frustrating? Is it tragic? I don't know. What do you think?
Well, when everything changed in the world, I tried not to think about it. I was happy I made the movie and was feeling good that I made the movie I hoped to make. So I made this conscious decision not to care at all about the release of it, because more important things were happening. And I didn't talk to anyone about it for months and didn't plan to. And then when Universal and I started kicking around what the options were, it was pretty simple. Either we were going to release it in a year or more, or we could release it on video on demand on June 12th. And I very quickly thought, I'm not going to hide this in my drawer for a year just because I need to hear people laugh in a theater. I know this movie will make people really happy at home. It does relate to a lot of what we're going through, so maybe it would be something positive. It might help people process some of what they're going through. And I also have this feeling like maybe it's supposed to come out now. Maybe it's why this got made. Maybe in some weird way, this is the moment for a movie like this that is addressing trauma and grief and how we deal with it and how we heal. And it's funny, and it'll give people a nice break. So I actually feel great about it. I obviously prefer the movie theater. We tested this movie in front of crowds. It gets giant laughs. And it's a bummer that that's not the experience everyone will have. But it's also a very intimate, personal movie that definitely benefits from being watched alone, where you really can feel it. Because it does go directly at some deep emotional ideas that, are maybe more easily experienced when you have some privacy.
Yeah. Some comedians in the UK, Judd, have been sort of fearing for the future of comedy clubs, because comedy is something that you experience in a crowd, ideally in a crowded venue, and you share the laughs, and there are ripple laughs, and the performer will bounce off that. And I wonder, as someone rooted in stand-up comedy, you opened for Jim Carrey and Adam Sandler and so on, Saturday Night Live. Is the same thing happening in the States? Are you worried for comedy clubs? Is that a tricky future as well?
I think it is, because the essence of comedy clubs is a lot of people jammed into a small space.
Yeah.
So when you talk about spreading people out in a movie theater and just having it be at half capacity, that generally works. But for a comedy club, it is so much about that intimacy and that shared experience. And most of those places, they're in basements and it's sweaty and there's not that much circulating air. The whole community isn't really designed for this. So it is a very scary situation for all the comedians, because not everybody has saved up money to just ride this out for more than 5 or 6 months. And it's it's a community of the best people who are so smart and so giving. It is scary. I have seen people do performances on Zoom and things like that, and a lot of it works much better than you would expect. And people are smart and creative, but it's a massive hit that really can only be solved because they've come up with some medicine that makes this less dangerous, or they have a vaccine.
Yeah. And do you know what you're going to be working on next, or does that seem like the most ridiculous question you've ever been asked? What with one thing and another?
Well, I was about to produce a romantic comedy starring Billy Eichner, and we were just starting pre-production in Buffalo, New York on that. When we're told it's safe, I hope we get back to doing that. We worked a long time with Billy Eichner and his co-writer, who's also directing, Nick Stoller, and that was shut down right at the last second. And beyond that, for me, at the end of directing a movie, I'm usually in a writing mode anyway. So I'm just sitting home trying to see if it's possible to get my head clear enough to develop any kind of idea.
Yeah. Judd Apatow, it's a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you very much indeed. Wish you all the best.
Thank you. Take care. Be well.